It was one of those golden Saturday mornings. Birds singing, kids riding bikes, and the smell of fresh-cut grass filling the air. I was halfway through unloading lumber for my backyard project when the piece shattered like a dropped glass. "Excuse me," came a voice so sharp it could slice through brick. I turned, and there she was, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of Maplewood. Drive dressed in her usual pastel tracksuit and clutching a clipboard, like it was a sword of power. "You can't have that truck parked there," she barked, pointing at the delivery truck in my driveway. "This is a residential zone, not a construction site." I blinked, trying to keep my calm. "Morning to you too, Karen. It's just unloading for my new shed project. I've got HOA approval and everything." But Karen smirked, lips curling. Approval? From whom? Because I didn't approve this. There it was, the line she used on everyone. Karen didn't run the HOA officially, but she controlled it through intimidation. She'd memorized every bylaw, every code, every loophole. If she didn't like something, she found a rule to stop it. I smiled politely, though inside my patience was already thinning. "I spoke to the HOA president last week. He said it's fine." Karen's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." She scribbled something on her clipboard, muttered code violation, and strutted off like a general marching into battle. By afternoon, 3 neighbors had already casually mentioned that Karen was complaining about me in the community group chat. The rumor mill spun fast. Apparently, I was running an illegal construction business from my yard. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the email thread proving I had full permission. I could have sent it to everyone right then, but something inside me decided otherwise. Karen didn't just want control. She thrived on drama. So if she wanted a battle, she was about to get one. I made a silent promise that night. I'd follow every single rule, every code, every restriction, exactly as written. And when I did, I'd make sure Karen saw what happens when someone plays by her own game better than she ever could. Because in the end, it wasn't about a shed anymore. It was about standing up to the self-appointed ruler of our peaceful little street. And soon, that street would never look the same again. By Monday morning, my project had barely begun when I saw it. A bright yellow envelope taped to my front door like a scarlet letter. The HOA seal was printed in bold at the top, but I didn't even need to open it to know whose fingerprints were all over this. Inside, the letter read, "You are in violation of Section 3B, unauthorized construction. Cease all activity immediately or face further penalties." It was signed by the HOA president, but the handwriting in the margin told the real story, reported by resident K. Davenport. Karen, of course. I actually laughed out loud. She'd wasted no time. Less than 48 hours after our conversation, she'd already turned in a formal complaint. My wife, Julia, peeked over my shoulder and sighed. "She's really doing this again?" "Yup," I said, folding the letter neatly, "and I'm going to play her game better than she ever imagined." So I called the HOA office directly. The president, a polite older man named Greg, picked up. "Hey Greg, got your letter. Funny thing though, I have your email from last week approving this project." There was a pause on the line, then a deep sigh. "Ah yes, Karen again, isn't it?" "You guessed it." He apologized, assured me he'd clear things up, and told me to ignore the letter. But I knew how this worked. Clearing it up wouldn't stop her. Karen thrived on attention. If the HOA didn't give her what she wanted, she'd escalate it. Sure enough, that evening, she was standing across the street with her phone out, snapping photos of my yard like some undercover agent. Every thud of a hammer made her flinch. Every wheelbarrow that rolled past made her glare harder. Then she did something I didn't expect. She started recruiting. By sunset, she'd already rallied a small crew of self-appointed rule enforcers. They gathered at her driveway like knights of the round table, whispering and pointing toward my house. I knew what was coming next, the official HOA ambush. But what Karen didn't realize was that I'd already prepared for it. I had documents, approvals, and a plan to turn her obsession with rules right back on her. Because when someone spends their whole life weaponizing the rulebook, sometimes the best way to win is to hand them a bigger one. The battle lines were drawn, and I was done playing nice. Wednesday evening, the sun was dipping low, and I was halfway through, setting the posts for my new shed when I saw 3 figures marching down the sidewalk in perfect formation. At the front, no surprise, was Karen, clipboard in hand, chin high, eyes locked on me like a hawk closing in on its prey. Behind her were 2 HOA board members, Greg, the president, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, and Linda, the treasurer, who clearly lived for this kind of drama. I set down my hammer slowly. "Evening, folks. What can I do for you?" Karen spoke before anyone else could. "You can stop what you're doing immediately. You're in violation of multiple HOA regulations. This," she gestured to the posts, "is completely unauthorized." Greg cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, technically he did submit plans. Technically? Karen snapped. Technically doesn't mean legally. Greg, the bylaws clearly state all structures must be aesthetically compatible with the neighborhood. That shed doesn't match the community color palette. I raised an eyebrow. Karen, it's made of wood, like every other shed on this street. She sniffed. Not Maplewood-approved wood? I bit back a laugh. Didn't realize trees needed HOA certification now? Her eyes flared. Don't get smart with me. You're setting a bad example for the community. We have standards. At that moment, several neighbors had come out, pretending to walk their dogs or water their plants. But really, they just wanted front row seats. It was clear who they were rooting for. I caught a few grins, a couple of thumbs ups, and one quiet, go-getter. Greg finally stepped forward, holding up a hand. All right, everyone, let's stay calm. He's within his rights as long as the design and color match the HOA guidelines, which they do. Karen's jaw dropped. You're taking his side? I'm taking the side of the rules, Greg said. The look she gave me could have melted concrete. She turned on her heel, stomped off, and muttered, "This isn't over." As the little crowd dispersed, Greg gave me a weary smile. You handled that well. Just keep your paperwork ready. She'll be back. I nodded. Oh, I'm counting on it. That night, I reinforced my fence, printed extra copies of every permit, and set up a small security camera pointing right at my yard. Because if the queen of the cul-de-sac wanted a war of documentation and drama, she was about to get one she'd never forget, and the next move was coming faster than she thought. The next morning, you could feel it. The neighborhood had split clean down the middle. It wasn't just about a shed anymore. It was about pride, power, and the invisible line between minding your business and becoming part of Karen's little empire. On one side, you had Karen's loyalists, mostly the ones too scared to defy her. They nodded along to her gossip, smiled when she passed, and pretended to agree just to avoid becoming her next target. On the other side were the rebels, folks who'd had enough of her nonsense. People like Tom, my next-door neighbor who'd once been fined for having a garden gnome visible from the street, and old Mrs. Porter, who'd gotten a written warning because her front wreath was seasonally inappropriate. By noon, small alliances were forming. Tom dropped by with a grin and 2 mugs of coffee. Morning, champ. I heard the Royal Parade showed up last night. Oh yeah, I chuckled. Karen brought the whole HOA cavalry. I think she's planning to conquer the block one backyard at a time. He laughed. You know, we've all been waiting for someone to stand up to her. I'm just glad it's finally you. That afternoon, while I worked on securing the foundation, a few more neighbors walked over, pretending to ask about tools but really wanting updates on the feud. It was like living in a soap opera. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen's court gathered like clockwork. They'd whisper, point, and scribble notes in what I assumed was her ever-growing list of neighborhood crimes. She'd stand at the center, arms crossed, scanning the street like a general watching her troops. Then, right before dinner, she made her next move. A printed notice appeared on everyone's door. Community Cleanliness Initiative, it said. But the fine print was where the real punchline hit. All homeowners were required to maintain uniform front yard appearance, or face fines. It was clearly targeted at me, and everyone knew it. Julia read it aloud, then rolled her eyes. She actually typed this up herself, didn't she? Most likely, I said, holding back a smirk. And she probably dropped one off at her own door just to make it look official. That's when I realized something crucial. Karen didn't just want me to stop. She wanted to break me. Public humiliation, peer pressure, HOA politics. It was her entire playbook. But what she didn't realize was that she'd just turned the whole neighborhood into an audience. And the more people watched, the more I planned to give them a show they'd never forget. The evening after the Community Cleanliness Initiative notices hit, my garage became mission control. Julia spread the permits and emails on the workbench while I brewed coffee. Tom brought old neighborhood newsletters from the HOA archive. Mrs. Porter insisted on lemon bars. Apparently, sugar makes planning more palatable. We needed a plan that was legal, decisive, and theatrical enough to unmask Karen's obsession. Nothing petty, nothing illegal. Just smart, public, and impossible to argue with. If Karen wanted rules, we'd give her rules. A tidal wave of them. All followed to the letter. Step 1, documentation. Every approval, every email, and every verbal confirmation from the HOA would be printed, organized into a binder labeled Project Compliance. That binder would be visible to anyone who asked. Transparency is the best antidote to rumor. Step 2, community messaging. I drafted a clear, factual post for the neighborhood group. No sarcasm, no gloating, just facts, dates, approvals, and the scope of the project. I attached photos and the stamped permit, The goal wasn't to shame Karen, but to inoculate the neighborhood against her noise. Step 3, allies. Tom, Julia, and I walked the block, politely asking neighbors if they'd sign a short statement supporting homeowners' rights to approved improvements. The responses surprised me. Within hours, 5 households volunteered and 2 more offered to testify if the HOA tried to fine me. Step 4, optics. Karen loved drama. So we planned a neighborhood open day at my property. We'd invite everyone to inspect the plans, ask questions, and see the work was legitimate. If Karen escalated, she'd have to do it in public, where her theatrics would look petty rather than official. Step 5, contingency. We found a local attorney willing to advise on HOA disputes. A single call to a lawyer would make any frivolous enforcement risky for the HOA. As we ticked off each item, the mood shifted from anxious to determined. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a fight for fairness, for the right of homeowners to make approved changes, without being bullied by a vigilante enforcer. Neighbors began whispering that maybe the cul-de-sac could become a place where people lived, free of petty rule policing and fear. That night, as I closed the binder and slid it into my truck, Julia squeezed my hand. "Promise me you won't let this become a war," she said. "I want peace." "I want peace too," I replied. "But sometimes peace requires standing up." We all knew Karen would escalate. That was her nature. But now when she did, she'd be facing a neighborhood that had an answer for every complaint. And that answer would be delivered calmly, legally, and in full public view, soon. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. By the weekend, rumors of a special HOA meeting were floating around the block. One that wasn't on the official calendar. Tom was the first to catch wind of it. "She's calling an emergency session," he told me over the fence. No announcement, no email, just her and a few board members. Word is she's trying to reinterpret the HOA code. Of course she was. If she couldn't beat the rules, she'd twist them. By Sunday evening, I confirmed it myself. Karen had invited Greg and Linda over to her house, along with 3 other board members. She'd been buttering up for months. I could see them gathered in her living room from my porch. The lights on, blinds half open, her pacing like a courtroom attorney. Julia joined me with a mug of tea. "Think she's talking about you?" I smirked. At this point, I'm probably her favorite topic. Inside, Karen pointed at something, likely a photo of my project. You could almost hear her voice through the glass, sharp and commanding. She gestured wildly, then waved a stack of papers like evidence in a trial. Greg's face said it all. Weary, annoyed, defeated. Linda, however, looked eager, jotting notes as if she was taking orders from a queen. The next morning, it became official. Every homeowner received an email from the HOA titled, "Clarification of Construction Guidelines." The message read like a bureaucratic nightmare, vague, contradictory, and full of new interpretations that just happened to make my project suddenly non-compliant. They even included a new community color standard that didn't exist before. Tom called immediately. "She's rewriting the rulebook mid-game." I wasn't surprised. Karen's entire strategy revolved around confusion and intimidation. If she could make the rules feel uncertain, she could control the narrative. But I had something she didn't. Proof. I forwarded Greg's original approval email to the entire HOA thread with one polite line. "Just wanted to make sure everyone has the original documentation before any reinterpretations are considered." It was calm, respectful, but devastating. Within 10 minutes, half the board replied, and none of them were backing Karen. Greg even responded publicly. "For clarity, the project remains approved as originally submitted. No further action required." That single email was like a thunderclap. Karen must have been fuming behind her curtains. That night she didn't wave, didn't speak, just stood on her porch glaring across the street, arms folded tight. The game had changed. She'd tried to manipulate the system, and now her power was slipping. But instead of backing down, she doubled down, and her next move would drag the entire neighborhood into chaos. 3 days passed without a word from Karen, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd accepted defeat. But that illusion shattered on Thursday morning when I stepped outside to grab the paper. There it was, a bold red envelope taped to my mailbox with the words, "Final warning," stamped across the front. I frowned, tearing it open. Inside was an official-looking letter, HOA letterhead, formal language, even Greg's signature at the bottom. It accused me of continuing unauthorized construction activities, and threatened immediate fines and removal orders. Only one problem. It was a fake. The signature wasn't quite right. The font was off. And worst of all, it referenced a rule that didn't even exist in the bylaws. I called Greg right away. "Greg, did the HOA send me another violation notice?" He sounded confused. "No, not at all. We've already settled your case. Why?" I read him a few lines from the letter. Silence hung on the line for a moment before he muttered, "That's not ours. Someone forged this." Someone, meaning Karen. I hung up, my blood boiling but my mind crystal clear. She'd crossed from nuisance to fraud, and she did it to intimidate me. Julia found me pacing the porch. "What happened?" She made her own HOA letter. "She's pretending to find me." Julia's eyes widened. "That's illegal," I finished, "and I'm going to handle it." First I scanned the letter. Then I photographed it. Envelope, tape, everything. Evidence. Next I printed Greg's confirmation email stating the notice was fake and attached both to a new post on the community board titled, "Clarification about HOA Communications." My post read, "If anyone receives a notice regarding new fines or construction violations, please verify with the official HOA email address before taking action. There's been a recent case of unauthorized correspondence." I didn't mention names, but everyone knew exactly who I meant. Within an hour, the thread exploded. Dozens of neighbors commented, some shocked, others laughing. "This is getting ridiculous," one wrote. Another added, "Karen needs a hobby." The best part? Greg himself replied publicly, "Yes, a forged letter was circulated. Please disregard it. We're investigating." The community was buzzing, and Karen's credibility crumbled faster than her composure. By sunset, she deleted her social media posts and pulled down her usual HOA reminders from the notice board. But people were talking, loudly. And for someone who thrived on control, public humiliation was the one thing she couldn't stand. So when I saw her that evening standing on her porch, arms trembling, eyes full of fire, I knew the storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. The day after the fake violation notice scandal, the neighborhood felt different, like the air itself was buzzing. People smiled at me as I passed. Kids waved. Even Mrs. Porter, who'd once been terrified of Karen, gave me a thumbs up from her porch. But peace never lasts long when you're dealing with someone like Karen. That afternoon, while I was setting new planks for the shed floor, I noticed something strange. A drone hovering just above my backyard fence. It bobbed in the air for a few seconds. Camera pointed straight at me, then zipped back toward Karen's house. I blinked in disbelief. "No way." Julia came out holding her phone. "Was that her?" "Oh, I guarantee it," I muttered, dusting sawdust off my hands. Guess the queen upgraded from clipboards to surveillance tech. Within an hour, she was back on her lawn, pretending to prune flowers while very obviously filming my yard with her phone. "Morning, Karen," I called cheerfully. She froze but didn't respond. I leaned on the fence. "If you want a tour, you can just ask." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm documenting violations." "Of what?" She didn't answer. She just stormed off, muttering something about evidence for the board. By evening, I'd had enough. I checked the HOA rules again, and sure enough, there was a clause about privacy and harassment through surveillance. It was vague, but clear enough to use. So I emailed Greg again. "Hey, Greg, quick question. Are residents allowed to film or use drones over private property without permission? Asking for a friend." His reply came fast. "Absolutely not. That's a violation of HOA privacy policy." "Who's doing it?" I didn't even have to say her name. Everyone already knew. The next morning, a formal notice appeared. Not on my door, but on hers. It cited breach of privacy, unauthorized surveillance, and disturbance of homeowner peace. For once, the rulebook she'd weaponized was used against her. That afternoon, the neighborhood gathered like it was a festival. People chuckled as they passed her house. The great enforcer of order had been officially reprimanded, publicly. Karen stood on her porch, face pale with fury. Her phone hung limp in her hand. I should have stopped there. I'd won that round. But when she glared at me across the street, mouthing, "This isn't over," something inside me snapped, because I realized she didn't care about rules. She cared about power. And if she wanted to keep pushing, I was done playing defense. The next move would be mine. And it would shake the entire neighborhood. The time the HOA privacy notice hit Karen's door, word had spread through every porch, chat group, and neighborhood text chain. You could practically feel the shift. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one setting the rules. She was the one under them. But while the neighbors laughed behind curtains and whispered on evening walks, Karen was plotting. And I knew it. 2 days later, I got a knock on my door. It was Greg, the HOA president, looking more tired than usual. He had a clipboard tucked under his arm and a faint smile that said, "You're not gonna like this. But here we go again." "Hey, Greg," I greeted him. "Let me guess, Karen?" He sighed. "She's persistent." Called an official HOA board meeting. Says there's been ongoing disturbances, and she's demanding an immediate site inspection. I chuckled. She's relentless. But sure, come on back. We walked to the backyard where the shed stood. Clean, compliant, freshly painted, and perfectly aligned with the guidelines. Greg nodded, visibly impressed. This looks fine. Actually better than most, he admitted. You've followed every code perfectly. Julia joined us with the binder, my trusty Project Compliance Bible. She handed it over like evidence in a trial. Greg flipped through it, each tab labeled and dated. This, he said, is more organized than our office files. I grinned, figured I'd need it. Then came the inevitable interruption. Karen, storming around the corner with her phone recording. There, see that? She barked. He's using industrial equipment! Look at that compactor. That's not residential grade. Greg pinched the bridge of his nose. Karen, please. We've been through this. Everything is approved. She stepped closer, eyes blazing. You're supposed to enforce the rules, not enable him. He's making a mockery of this community. Her voice echoed across the block. Curtains twitched. Dogs barked. And for a second you could hear nothing but her breathing, sharp and angry. Greg finally turned to her. Calm, measured but firm. Karen, the HOA operates by official approval and written regulation, not personal opinion. You're out of line. It was like watching a queen get dethroned. Karen froze, color draining from her face. Then, without another word, she stormed off. Again. After Greg left, Julia looked at me. You think she'll stop now? I laughed softly. Not a chance. When someone's built their identity on control, they don't quit, they escalate. And sure enough, that night, Karen's porch light stayed on till past midnight. I could see her through the blinds, pacing, typing, and plotting. Something big was coming. And when it arrived, it would test just how far she was willing to go. The next morning began quietly, almost suspiciously so. No clipped footsteps, no fake community reminders taped to mailboxes, no drone humming overhead. The silence felt like the eye of a storm. I was halfway through my coffee when a knock came at the door. It wasn't Greg this time. It was Linda, the HOA treasurer and one of Karen's closest allies. She stood there, clutching a manila folder and wearing an expression that wasn't smug for once. It was anxious. Morning, I said cautiously. Karen send you to serve another fake notice? She shook her head. No, I came on my own. Can we talk? Julia joined me at the door. We exchanged a wary glance, then stepped aside. Linda walked in, lowered her voice, and said, You didn't hear this from me, but Karen's trying to call an emergency vote to suspend your building permit. I raised an eyebrow. Suspend? She can't do that without cause. She's rewriting the meeting minutes, Linda whispered, changing the wording from last month's approval to make it seem like it was conditional. She even typed Greg's initials next to it. If she gets the other board members to sign off, it'll look official. Julia gasped. That's fraud. Linda nodded slowly. That's why I'm here. I'm done being part of her little regime. She bullies everyone, even the board. Greg's tired of her, but she manipulates votes behind his back. I leaned on the counter, processing. So what do we do? She slid the folder across to me. Inside were printed emails, old meeting transcripts, and a few screenshots. Proof, she said. Everything she's been altering or faking. Use it however you need to. Just don't mention me. It was the first crack in Karen's armor. Her right-hand woman had turned. When Linda left, Julia exhaled. This could end it all. Or, I said, it could make her explode. We didn't have to wait long to find out. That evening, an urgent HOA meeting notice hit everyone's inbox. The subject line, misconduct and code violations. Immediate action required. It was happening. She was pushing for a public showdown. But this time, I had more than permits and paperwork. I had proof. And I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to reveal who Karen really was in front of the entire neighborhood. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't yelling louder. It's letting the truth echo all on its own. And when it did, everyone would finally hear it. The urgent HOA meeting took place that Friday night in the community clubhouse. The same beige building where bake sales, bingo nights, and now, apparently, neighborhood warfare took place. By the time I arrived, every seat was filled. Neighbors whispered and craned their necks as I walked in. Karen sat at the front, posture perfect, hair slicked back, eyes glinting like she'd already won. Beside her were two of her loyal board members, and poor Greg, who looked like a man walking into his own sentencing. The meeting started with Karen clearing her throat dramatically. We're here to address ongoing violations and misconduct regarding unauthorized construction and repeated disturbances of community peace. She turned toward me. Mr. Lawson, care to explain why your so-called shed project has turned this neighborhood upside down? I smiled politely. Because you keep showing up in my backyard with a phone camera. A few people chuckled, not the reaction she expected. Her lips tightened. Let's keep this civil. The board has received multiple complaints about noise, debris, and forged HOA letters. I interrupted. The room fell silent. Karen froze. I stood, holding up the manila folder Linda had given me. Before we go any further, I think the board and the community should see something. I opened the folder and placed copies of Karen's fake violation letters and the altered meeting minutes on the table. These, I said clearly, are forged documents, and I have digital timestamps proving when they were edited. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Greg leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Karen, did you authorize these? Her face flushed. That's absurd. He's making that up. Linda, sitting near the back, slowly stood. He's not. Every head turned. Karen's eyes widened. I've been on the board for 6 years, Linda said, and I've watched Karen manipulate and intimidate every one of us. She rewrote those files. I have the originals. Gasps filled the room. Someone whispered, I knew it. Karen tried to speak, but Greg cut her off. That's enough. We'll be reviewing this immediately. Her voice cracked as she snapped, You're all blind! He's turning you against me. But it was too late. The queen had fallen. As the meeting adjourned, people came up to pat me on the back, some even thanking me for standing up to her. Karen stormed out, slamming the clubhouse door so hard the walls shook. For the first time in months, I walked home feeling like it was over. But the thing about people like Karen is, they never know when to stop fighting. And her next move would take things from petty to personal. The weekend after the HOA meeting was unusually calm. Birds were chirping, kids were playing again, and for the first time in months, Karen's porch was dark. No spying, no stalking, no fake notices, but peace in this neighborhood never lasted long. On Sunday morning, Julia came running into the kitchen, her face pale. You need to see this, she said, holding her phone. She opened the security app. I saw the footage from the previous night, around 1:47 a.m. A shadow crept across our driveway. The person wore a hoodie, moving low and deliberate. The motion-activated light flicked on, and for a split second, there she was, Karen. She was holding a small container, crouching near the base of our new shed. Then she poured something on the ground and sprinted away. I froze. What in the world? Julia zoomed in. That's gasoline, she whispered. I grabbed my jacket and bolted outside. The air still had that faint, acrid smell of fuel near the shed's edge. It hadn't ignited, thank God. Maybe she chickened out, or maybe the lighter didn't work. Either way, that footage changed everything. She's crossed the line, I said. This isn't HOA drama anymore. This is criminal. Julia nodded firmly. We're taking this to the police. That afternoon, we sat down at the station with Officer Ramirez, a calm, level-headed guy who'd probably dealt with every kind of suburban nonsense imaginable. But even he raised his eyebrows as he watched the video. Yup, he said. That's gasoline. And that's enough to file an official report for attempted property damage, maybe arson if intent can be proven. He promised to handle it discreetly, but in a small neighborhood, secrets travel faster than gossip. By Monday, the footage had spread like wildfire. People were furious, not at me, but at her. Karen had always positioned herself as the enforcer of morality, the self-appointed guardian of community standards. But now, everyone saw what she really was. Obsessive, dangerous, unhinged. Even Greg stopped by that evening. She's been removed from the HOA board pending investigation, he told me. And, between you and me, she's lawyering up. I nodded, but inside, I felt something else. Not satisfaction. Just exhaustion. We had proof, police involvement, and public support. You'd think that would end it. But that night, I looked out the window and saw her again, standing at her porch, watching. Her face was blank, cold. And I realized then, this wasn't over. Not even close. By Tuesday morning, the HOA group chat was on fire. Messages poured in faster than anyone could read them. Screenshots, shocked emojis, and lines like, "Did you see the video?" And she needs to be removed permanently. For once, it wasn't me under the microscope. It was Karen. When I walked out to get the mail, I noticed something strange. Her house was quiet. The usual decorations, the HOA-approved residence sign, the fake neighborhood watch sticker, all gone. Curtains drawn. No movement. Julia joined me on the porch, sipping her coffee. You think she's hiding? Probably, I said, but not for long. Sure enough, that afternoon, Greg called an emergency HOA meeting, this time without Karen. I went, mostly to observe. The room buzzed with nervous energy as board members filed in, including Linda, who sat beside me and whispered. She's furious. I got a text from her this morning. She says she's been betrayed by traitors. Greg called the meeting to order. We need to address the incident involving former board member Karen Holt. The video evidence has been verified by both the HOA and local authorities, effective immediately. She's suspended indefinitely from all HOA duties and communications. The applause that followed was louder than any I'd heard at a community meeting before. Some even stood up to clap. Greg continued. Moving forward, we'll also be reviewing past board activity under her leadership. Several residents have submitted complaints. We'll make things right. Then he turned to me. Mr. Lawson, on behalf of the HOA, I want to personally apologize for the harassment and interference you've faced. You followed every regulation, and we appreciate your patience through all this. The room erupted again, neighbors nodding, clapping, murmuring words of support. It felt surreal. I thanked him, but my eyes couldn't help drifting toward the window. Across the street, Karen's house loomed dark and silent. After the meeting, Linda stopped me outside. She won't take this lying down, she warned. She told me once, if I lose control, I'll make sure no one wins. That sent a chill through me. Later that night, I checked the footage again. Just habit now. Every camera showed normal activity, except one. At 9:23 p.m., the motion sensor near my fence triggered. The camera flickered for a moment, then cut out entirely. I rewound the feed, static. Julia came to my side. What happened? I whispered. She's cutting the power lines to the cameras. And as if on cue, outside a branch snapped in the dark. This time Karen wasn't hiding. She was hunting. The silence outside was heavy, the kind that presses down on you, until every sound feels like a threat. Julia gripped my arm as I stared at the blacked-out camera feed. She's out there, I whispered. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and crept toward the backyard door. The beam sliced through the darkness, glinting off the metal fence. The shed stood still and silent, but a faint rustle came from the far corner, the one nearest Karen's property line. I moved closer. The grass crunched softly under my boots. Then the beam caught movement. A figure crouched low, wearing a hoodie, the same one from the last video. Karen! I barked. She froze. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then she bolted. I sprinted after her, the flashlight bouncing wildly, catching glimpses of her darting through the shrubs. Stop! I shouted. You're trespassing. Julia, brave as ever, had already called 911. Her voice trembled as she relayed the details, but her hands didn't shake. She was done being scared. Karen cut across the yard, trying to vault the fence, but her foot snagged on a wire. She stumbled, and the flashlight beam hit what she'd dropped, wire cutters and a small black box. A signal jammer. I grabbed it, disbelief flooding in. She was trying to block the cameras. By then, the sirens were faint but growing louder. Karen twisted free and stumbled toward her porch. She turned back just once, her face half lit by my flashlight. Wild, furious, but also terrified. Within minutes, police cars rolled in, lights flashing blue and red across every driveway. Officers spread out, searching the yards. Karen tried to play innocent. I was just walking my dog, she snapped, though she didn't have one. Officer Ramirez wasn't buying it. We have you on video trespassing and damaging property, he said flatly. You're coming with us. The neighborhood came alive, doors opening, curtains shifting. People watched as Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was escorted into the back of a patrol car. As they drove her away, Julia leaned against me. It's finally over, she whispered. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But part of me knew. People like Karen don't just fade away quietly. They regroup. They scheme. And judging by the cold look she gave me through that car window, I could tell she wasn't finished. Not yet, because even behind bars or in meetings or wherever she ended up next, Karen always found a way to claw back control. And the next round was going to be bigger and louder than ever. For a week, the neighborhood felt different, calmer, lighter, almost like the air itself had been cleared. Karen's porch stayed empty, her blinds closed tight, and for once, there were no HOA compliance alerts in anyone's mailbox. But beneath that calm, something was brewing. We learned that Karen hadn't been arrested, just detained, questioned, and released on bail. The police had enough to scare her, but not enough to lock her up. And if I knew Karen, a warning only made her more dangerous. One morning, Julia handed me the mail with a worried look. You should see this. Inside was a crisp, legal-looking letter from an attorney. Notice of civil claim. Karen was suing us. The accusations were outrageous. Defamation, harassment, invasion of privacy, and intentional emotional distress. She claimed I had manipulated HOA documents, I had harassed her, and I had orchestrated a public smear campaign. Julia let out a bitter laugh. She's flipping the story. I sighed. Classic Karen move. When she loses power, she rewrites the rules. Greg called that afternoon. I heard about the lawsuit. She's trying to bankrupt you through legal fees, he said. But don't worry. Everyone's backing you. The HOA has your side this time. Still, the stress was real. Between police reports, lawyers, and neighborhood gossip, our lives had turned into an ongoing drama. Every time I thought about the footage, the meetings, the shouting matches, It all came rushing back. But what Karen didn't realize was that her little revenge campaign had just exposed something bigger. Linda stopped by one evening with another manila folder, this time with financial records. "Look at this," she said, eyes serious. During her time on the HOA board, Karen was funneling community maintenance funds into a private improvement budget. I flipped through the pages, stunned. She was stealing HOA money? Essentially, yes, Linda said. And now that she's filed a civil case, that opens her up to discovery. You can counter-sue and force all of this into the open. Julia grinned. Poetic justice. But I wasn't smiling yet, because Karen wasn't done fighting. She was spreading rumors again. Anonymous posts popped up in neighborhood groups, claiming I'd forged evidence and set her up. And though everyone knew the truth, the whispers still burned. That's when I realized this wasn't just about one feud anymore. It was about principle. About showing what happens when someone who lives for control finally loses it and tries to claw it back by any means necessary. And that's when I decided it was time to end this once and for all. The HOA hearing wasn't supposed to be dramatic. It was meant to be procedural, a formal meeting, to close the investigation into Karen's actions and officially remove her from the board. But in our neighborhood, nothing involving Karen ever stayed simple. The meeting took place in the same clubhouse where this all began. Chairs lined up in neat rows, a projector screen at the front, and the whole board seated behind a long wooden table. Greg presided in the center, looking every bit like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Karen arrived late, of course, dressed in a sharp blazer, holding a thick binder, and wearing that familiar smirk. You could almost hear the collective groan ripple through the room as she took her seat. Greg cleared his throat. Let's begin. This session is to address the conduct of former board member Karen Holt, following recent allegations of misconduct, property damage, and falsified documents. Karen immediately raised her hand. "Excuse me, but I have the right to defend myself. And I intend to." She stood, flipping open her binder. "These so-called evidences are fabricated. I have screenshots proving he," she pointed directly at me, "altered the meeting files himself." The room stirred, murmurs spreading. I stayed calm. Julia squeezed my hand under the table. Then Greg nodded toward me. "Mr. Lawson, your response?" I rose, holding a USB drive. "Yes, I do have a response, and it's not screenshots. It's a full-screen recording from the HOA database logs." Greg plugged it in. The projector flickered to life, showing the audit trail, timestamps, user logins, file edits. Every alteration led back to one account, K. Holt. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the projector. Karen's smirk faltered. That's fake," she stammered. Linda stood up in the audience. "No, it's not. I pulled that data myself before she locked me out." The audience gasped. Greg leaned forward, voice firm. "Karen Holt, based on this evidence, you are hereby permanently banned from the HOA board and stripped of all voting rights in this community." Karen slammed her binder shut. "You're all making a mistake! This neighborhood will fall apart without me." But no one believed her anymore. As she stormed out, the door hit the wall with a hollow thud. For a moment, the room was still. Then the neighbors started clapping. Greg looked at me and said quietly, "You did the community a favor." I smiled faintly. I just wanted peace. But peace, I was about to learn, wasn't something Karen gave up easily, because she had one last move left, and it would shake the entire street. The night after the HOA hearing felt like victory. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate us. Kids rode bikes down the street again without their parents worrying about rule enforcement. For the first time in months, the neighborhood actually felt like a community. But peace never lasts when Karen's involved. It started with whispers, quiet, uncertain ones. Someone had seen her car late at night near the park entrance. Another swore they spotted her talking to a local reporter outside the grocery store. Then came the flyers, folded neatly, slipped into mailboxes and pinned to bulletin boards. Bold headline, "How corruption? What they're hiding from you." Each flyer was filled with doctored screenshots, fake testimonies, and exaggerated claims about me, Greg, and Linda. She even included a photo of me standing beside the shed with a caption, "Illegal construction approved through bribery." It would have been laughable if it hadn't stirred old doubts in a few residents. That's what Karen was counting on. Confusion. Divide and conquer. Julia found one taped to our gate. "She's unhinged," she said, ripping it down. "After everything she's done, she still thinks she can rewrite reality." But this time, I didn't get angry. I got strategic. Greg and I met that evening with Linda and a few level-headed neighbors. "She's pushing a narrative," Greg said, rubbing his temples. "She's trying to rally the few people who still think she's a victim." "So let's end the story," I replied, "once and for all, publicly." We decided to host an open community event, not another meeting. Something different. A barbecue, family-friendly, casual, but with one clear purpose: transparency. Greg would give a short speech, I'd present the full project records, and Linda would reveal the HOA's new policies to prevent abuse of power. Word spread fast. Most neighbors were thrilled. Karen, predictably, was not. She began posting in the old HOA Facebook group, angry rants about corruption and neighborhood cover-ups. By the morning of the event, I expected her to crash it. I even told Julia, if she shows up, we stay calm. Let the truth speak louder. And sure enough, halfway through Greg's speech, she arrived. Karen marched in, sunglasses on, clutching a microphone she'd brought herself. Don't let them fool you, she shouted. You're all sheep! He's the real criminal here, the crowd murmured, uneasy. Cameras turned on. I stepped forward slowly, meeting her glare. Karen, I said evenly, you've had your say for months. Now it's our turn. And this time she wasn't walking over anyone, because what I revealed next would silence her for good. The tension was so thick you could feel it hum through the crowd. Karen stood in the middle of the park, microphone in hand, trying to shout over Greg's speech and the low murmur of neighbors, recording everything on their phones. You're all being lied to, she screamed. He manipulated the system. He ruined my life! Her voice cracked with a mix of rage and desperation. For months she had thrived on control, but now, every eye in the neighborhood was turned against her. I stepped forward, calm but firm, and gestured toward the projector we'd set up for the barbecue presentation. If you really want the truth, Karen, let's show everyone together. Greg nodded, hitting play. On the big screen, the footage rolled. Time-stamped videos from our security cameras, audio clips from the HOA meetings, and digital logs showing every file she had tampered with. There was no narration, no dramatic music, just cold, undeniable evidence. At first, Karen laughed, a shaky, nervous laugh that didn't reach her eyes. This proves nothing. Anyone could fake that. Then Linda spoke from the crowd. I was there, Karen. I watched you edit those files. You told me. They'll never know. Well, now they do. The crowd murmured louder. Greg added quietly. And the financial audit confirms that over $12,000 in HOA funds were redirected under your account. Karen froze. Her smile vanished. People began pulling out their phones, snapping photos, whispering to each other. The power she once held over everyone was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. Finally, she shouted, You think you've won? You think this makes you heroes? This neighborhood is pathetic without me. But her words didn't land the same way anymore. Nobody backed her up. Nobody clapped. Instead, Mrs. Green, an older neighbor who'd once been one of Karen's biggest supporters, stood up from her chair. You scared people, Karen. You bullied us. You turned neighbors into enemies. We just wanted peace. That silence afterward felt like justice. Karen's hand shook as she dropped the microphone. For a moment, she looked smaller, defeated even. Then she turned and walked away, muttering under her breath, her voice trembling with a final bitter line. You'll regret this. But this time, no one followed her. No one defended her. As she disappeared down the sidewalk, Julia exhaled beside me. It's finally over, she whispered. I looked out across the crowd, people smiling, kids laughing, the smell of grilled burgers filling the air again. After months of chaos, the truth had finally set everyone free. Or so we thought. Because later that night, something unexpected happened. That night, the neighborhood was alive with relief. Laughter, music, clinking soda cans. It felt like a victory celebration that had been months in the making. For once, everyone was on the same page. Julia and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset fade into deep orange and purple. Feels strange, she said, smiling softly. Like we finally got our lives back. I nodded, but something in the back of my mind still buzzed. Karen's last words, "You'll regret this," echoed like a splinter under my skin. Around 10 p.m., the noise quieted down. One by one, porch lights flickered off, and the neighborhood fell into a comfortable silence. I was just about to head inside when I heard it. A deep, low rumble from the end of the street. At first, I thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. Then it grew louder, metallic, rhythmic, heavy. Julia came to the window. What is that sound? And then we saw it. Rolling slowly under the streetlights, headlights glaring like eyes, was a road roller, the same bright yellow construction machine that had once flattened driveways during community maintenance week. Only this time, it wasn't parked or manned by contractors. It was moving. Toward our house. My jaw dropped. No way. As it drew closer, I could see the figure in the driver's seat. Hunched. Familiar. Unmistakable. Karen. Julia gasped. She stole the road roller? I ran outside, waving my hands. Karen, stop this! But she didn't slow down. Her voice echoed from the machine, distorted by the rumble. "You think you can humiliate me? You think you can destroy my reputation? Let's see how you like it when I control the rules again." The roller veered off the road, crunching through her own yard, tearing through her manicured lawn, and straight toward the fence that separated our properties. Neighbors started coming out, phones in hand, shouting for her to stop. Greg called the police on speaker while Linda screamed, "Karen, you're insane!" The roller hit the fence. Wood splintered. Dust flew, but stopped inches before my shed. The machine hissed, gears grinding as it idled. Karen sat behind the wheel, shaking, eyes wide and glistening under the harsh lights. Then she just broke, hands gripping the steering wheel, sobbing, yelling something none of us could quite hear. When the police arrived minutes later, they surrounded the roller and gently pulled her out. And just like that, the woman who once ruled the neighborhood was finally gone, taken away under flashing blue lights. The next morning, her lawn was nothing but tire tracks and broken boards, and somehow that image said everything. The morning after the road roller incident, the neighborhood looked like a storm had passed. Not one of weather, but of madness. Karen's perfectly trimmed lawn was now a churned patchwork of dirt and crushed turf. The splintered fence between our yards lay in pieces, sunlight cutting through where there used to be boundaries. For the first time, her house stood quiet. No porch cameras, no flyers, no shrill voice echoing across the block. Just silence. Greg showed up early, coffee in hand and exhaustion in his eyes. "The cops said she's being evaluated," he told me. "They found out she'd rented that road roller under a fake company name. Said it was for driveway repair." Julia shook her head. "All that just because she couldn't stand not being in charge." Linda joined us, holding a small box. "She's not coming back," she said softly. "The HOA voted unanimously to revoke her membership rights. Her property's being listed for sale by her family." It felt surreal. For months, Karen had been the center of everything. The chaos, the fear, the drama. And now, she was just gone. Later that day, as neighbors gathered to repair the damaged fence, someone brought lemonade, someone else fired up a grill, and laughter started filling the air again. The sound of hammers, not shouting. The smell of barbecue, not stress. Greg turned to me with a grin. "You know, for what it's worth, I think this neighborhood needed this wake-up call. Maybe we can actually be neighbors now, not just rule followers." I chuckled. "Maybe chaos has its uses." Julia leaned on my shoulder, smiling. "You turned a feud into a fresh start." I glanced at the shed, still standing, untouched, a quiet symbol of everything we'd fought for. "I didn't plan to," I said, "but sometimes you have to roll through the nonsense to build something solid." People laughed when I said that. It wasn't intentional wordplay, but it stuck. By evening, the story had already spread across the block. How Karen tried to control the neighborhood and ended up paving her own downfall. A few days later, a moving truck pulled up in front of her house. No one waved, no one spoke, just the sound of furniture being loaded, memories boxed away, and finally, the slam of the door that marked the end of her reign. As the truck drove off, Julia whispered, "So, what now?" I smiled, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. "Now, we enjoy the quiet. We've earned it." And with that, the road roller feud, the saga of control, chaos, and community, finally rolled to a stop. Peace had returned. For real this time.